Hi, I'm Doris Epstein, and welcome to MENSCHlife TV. For several years, a fight has been raging here. The fight is whether to fund the Gay Pride Parade or not, if it includes Queers, a group that calls itself Queers Against Israel Apartheid. The Jewish community is up in arms. There's been petitions, there's been delegations, but to no avail. They did march, they did fund the Gay Pride Parade, the city did, and we're going to find out more about it because this problem about Israel Apartheid, that term, that hateful term, has been in one form or another toxic and viral across North America. So meet James Pasternak, City Councillor, and you, James, have been foremost. You've been up in the trenches with this fight. So tell me, how did they get the funding? When? The federal government, the Ontario government, the City Hall said that that term, Israel Apartheid, is libelous and hate speech.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this phraseology is offensive. It's a slur. It's used to bully and to demonize. It produces no public good whatsoever, and it violates the city's cultural funding discrimination policy. Our community is highly offended by this demonization, and we've got to do everything we can to stop it.
Martin Gladstone, who's a lawyer and very active in this fight too, has made a film called Reclaiming Our Pride. Let's watch it. Here it goes.
It was scary. I didn't feel safe about it.
Why is our gay parade, our gay pride parade, letting people march when it has absolutely nothing to do with gay rights?
That to liken Israel to Nazism is to say that Israel, like Nazi Germany, Israel, like South Africa, are so evil, so irredeemably evil, that they cannot be repaired. They can't be fixed. They have to be destroyed.
There was all this anti-Israel messaging on their signs. They knew that it wasn't positive. They knew that, I think, could translate it into a sense of hate.
All the anti-Semitic people. They give them a real good reason to sink their teeth in to hate Israel before they have this latent kind of flowing, they don't like Jews, their parents have taught them not to like Jews, they don't really know why. But now, when you bring in a real reason and say that Israel's an apartheid state, and there's nobody to say that it isn't, that's fueling the flames of anti-Semitism, and that's what makes it hurtful and harmful and dangerous.
Marching down the street wearing swastikas, comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. how dare anybody do that? How dare anybody minimize the atrocities of Nazi Germany or compare Israel to committing those atrocities?
There is only one rational, absolute reason that we can come up with for the targeting of Israel, which is anti-Semitism, because no rational person would even contemplate such a thing.
I'm worried that Queers Against Israel Apartheid are using Pride as a platform for their anti-Israel politics, and that's not what Pride is about. And so I guess once they start using Pride as a platform for their anti-Israel messaging, perhaps other groups of political nature will start doing the same thing, at which point Pride is going to possibly become a battleground.
That tells it. It's pretty vivid and pretty scary.
Yeah, there's no doubt that many of the scenes that we saw there are very repugnant. It has no place in a culturally funded
Well, here's what
event.
Avi Ben Lolo says from the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. We cannot let anti-Israel elements hijack the gay parade, or they will have succeeded in doing that if the funding is not cut, which it wasn't cut. This is before the decision. The parade is about supporting gay rights and not about Middle East politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that that their participation is a violation of city policy. And our goal at the city is to marginalize and put pressure on them to make sure they don't participate.
Okay, let's take a break, James, and come back with how, in spite of the fact that you have an anti-discrimination policy in place, in spite of the fact that people like yourself are in the forefront of against battling this issue, it did get passed, they did march, and their funding was not cut. Back in a minute. How did it get cut?
Well,
how did it not get cut?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, first of all, we've got to put pressure on Queen's Park, who gives Pride $300,000.
That's the Ontario legislature.
Yes, at the Ontario legislature, and that should only be given conditionally. In 2011, Quiet did not march, and they were granted funding. This year, I did not support the funding, but what we did do was we put a condemnation through Canada's largest city. So now we have a situation in which Canada's largest school board, the Toronto District School Board, when I was on it, we condemned Israeli Apartheid Week and banned it from our property. The legislature of Ontario has condemned it. The Parliament has condemned it. Now Canada's largest city. We will continue to marginalize this group. We will continue to choke them off of the funding and to make sure they whittle away as the discriminatory and the discriminatory ideology that they carry.
I want to go back to the policy that City Hall has. You have an anti-discriminatory policy, which your city manager said this term Israel Apartheid does not violate. Also, I want to mention the person that was the defining resolution on is it discrimination or not, that term, Uzma Skakir. She's the Director of Equality, Diversity, and Human Rights for the City of Toronto. She's also a well-known anti-Israel activist, a known supporter of Israel Apartheid Week, and she seems to have the last word on is this discriminatory or not.
Well, I can only say that when that was brought to my attention, she was hired before I arrived at City Hall, And I find it absolutely astonishing that someone who supports the ideology that Israel is an apartheid state, which of course is nothing but a smear against Israel and its supporters, is actually crafting our policy or our recommendations. Now, that having been said, Council has the final word on reports that come before us, and we have totally rejected that view.
So I have to ask you again, if you've rejected it, and you know her views, and she was a defining person on this policy, how did it get passed? How did they get funded?
Well, as I said, I did not support the funding. There was a compromise reached that we would have a condemnation of the term Israeli apartheid. We would repudiate the report that came that said it did not violate the policy, our anti-discrimination policy. It does violate our anti-discrimination policy.
Unquestionably. Would you say unquestionably?
I would say unquestionably. Clearly, in our cultural funding policy, you cannot demonize or target persons of country of origin. The term Israeli apartheid targets people on country of origin. It is offensive and it violates our policy. That report was misguided. It is erroneous. It is null and void.
What's being done about the person that wrote that report? Uzma Skakir. Is anything being done?
I'm not prepared to talk about human resources issues. Clearly, there's a problem there in which Council was provided with a document which had certain recommendations. We did not know the backgrounder on it. We have repudiated that document. It is the view of Council. Council has the final word on any reports coming forward. We have condemned the term Israeli apartheid. Canada's largest city has spoken, but the battle isn't over. We will continue to fight this group, make sure they stay out of public events, culturally funded events, and make sure they're marginalized to the point that they're irrelevant.
Well, what happens next? It's over. The parade happened.
The parade happened.
They got the funding.
Yeah, I mean, it was very unfortunate that once again, Pride Toronto did not show the leadership that we expect of them to prevent this group from funding, from marching. The dispute settlement mechanism turned into a kangaroo court, and at the same time, we will be reviewing our full anti-discrimination policy in the fall. It comes to the executive committee in September.
So September, you look at this whole issue again. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. It was before executive in July. I wanted it cleaned up and repaired before the parade. It was deferred to September. We're going to be working on it then. It goes to the executive, which is chaired by the mayor, and then it would go up to full council. But I want to say once again, council has spoken. We find the phraseology repugnant. We have condemned it. And that is the final word. It does not meet the kind of threshold that we expect of the city.
In spite of everything you're saying and the anti-discrimination policy, Uzma Skakir, who defines if it is or it's not, is still in place. And she appears to hold sway. She's the last word. Is that correct?
It is. She does not hold sway, and we have a very serious problem. This person was brought onto the city by a recruiting agency before I came to City Council.
And it's a new job for her. She was only on the job a few months.
This is a very serious matter. We're going to have to review it. But as I'm sure you understand, I cannot discuss the future human resources position of a certain individual. That having been said, certainly her writings are in the public domain, and they are bizarre and astonishing and very disturbing that we would receive a report that mirrors that.
All right, more about Israel apartheid and the gay parade and the funding thereof with James Pasternak, City Councillor. Israel apartheid, a term that is rampant, viral across North America, especially on the campuses. I see this in a much broader light. What you're doing could be a blueprint for how to handle this term and groups that support it across the continent.
Yeah, I mean, we need people to speak up. We need governments to speak up. We need leadership, strong leadership at post-secondary campuses who show strength and will not cave in and wobble to these groups. We need donors to write in and explain that they're going to be holding back funding at post-secondary institutions during Israeli Apartheid Week. We've got to stop this demonization and bullying, and certainly government plays a role. So we've seen a strong voice from government, and we have to keep the battle going.
What can we do about it, the general public? Because there's been talk about suing. It's not just the city that funded it. There were private sponsors like the TD Bank, for instance. And there's talk of suing them, the corporate sponsors.
Well, I'm not, I can't speak to litigation against corporate sponsors,
Then what can we do? Because the Jewish community did everything they possibly could, or did they not?
We are making progress. To have this banned from Canada's largest school board and condemned by Canada's largest school board and our largest city and the legislature and parliament, and put pressure on the leadership of post-secondary institutions as well as cultural organizations such as Pride Toronto. We've just got to keep up the battle. We have to show that we are not prepared to let this go. We're going to stand up to bullying and demonization.
So in the fall, this will get resolved, this issue?
Well, ideally, we would be working towards a resolution. We're going to be updating our anti-discrimination policy to tighten up the holes that have allowed this group to march. We're going to be making it clear to Pride Toronto that there will be sanctions and punitive measures in the future if they turn a blind eye to this group. The dispute settlement mechanism, which we were supposed to give a good try to this year, has turned out to be a mess. So it unfortunately has been a little disappointing. But from a marching point of view, they looked like a very small, pathetic group.
It's
in
amazing.
That parade.
They are a small group, and yet the publicity that they got could not have been, is worth millions. It's worth millions.
Well, I mean, I did not see the parade, but I have heard they looked shrunken and marginalized, and people were ignoring them, and they looked way out of place. And I'm hoping they'll just run away. Fade away, but we'll keep the pressure on. We'll keep working to get them out.
They may fade away, but Israel Apartheid, that term, is growing in power and manifesting itself in different areas, in different communities, from the United Church to entertainment groups.
You know, there used to be a time when if someone used a phrase or a section of words that were offensive, you would be able to explain to the person that what you're saying is offensive, and it would stop. It's not stopping in this case. What they do is they argue it's a fact, and then the debate digresses into a historical, statistical fact, and then it goes back and forth on more of a historical debate. If any other group had been demonized in this way based on ethnicity, religion, color, country of origin, we wouldn't be debating whether they're lazy, whether they're not smart enough, these kinds of stereotypes. We would stop the demonization and the hate. For some reason, we get drawn into this historical Middle East debate, and that is something we should not take the bait over.
We shouldn't even make the first step to enter the debate. You don't dialogue with a rigid position. There's no dialoguing or with discrimination.
Well, I mean, look.
And hatred.
Well, I mean, look, if there was a racial slur out there that said a certain nationality was not smart, you wouldn't then digress into a debate using all kinds of macros and statistics on whether they're smart or not. You would stop saying it. You are offending people, you are hurting people, you're targeting a specific group. It would stop. This has got to stop, and we're prepared to do everything we can at City Hall to make sure it does stop.
How do most of the councillors, the majority, or generally all the council, what is the stand on it? What stand do they take?
Well, the problem is when you cut funding because of QAIA, because of an Israeli apartheid group, the spin masters at Pride Toronto say that you're beating up on the gay community. So for many downtown councillors, they get very nervous when they start hearing that, and they're very reluctant to cut the funding because the spin at the other side is it's anti-gay. But what we're really trying to do is we're trying to stop a group that bullies and demonizes and violates our anti-discrimination policy. That's the goal, and we have to stay with it.
And you will.
We will. We will continue. We will not let it go.
We're going to talk about this in the fall.
Yes.
When it comes to council. We're going to see what happens. And in the meantime, do you have any advice for the general public?
Well, I mean, when it comes up to executive committee in September, we've got to get some deputants down there to present. They've got 5 minutes to make their case. We should make the case that we find this highly offensive.
So as many people, as many deputations
if we get deputants down to City Hall, go onto the city's website at toronto.ca, and it's you click on the September schedule. It will be executive committee. Make sure it's on the agenda, and we should stack the room with people who are highly offended by this, and we should be standing up against it.
James Pasternak, I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Because it's good luck for all of us,
yeah.
What you're doing.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you in a couple of months.
Yes, have a great summer. Thanks for having me on the show.
Anxiety and depression in grown-ups is pretty tough, but when it happens with children, it's heartbreaking. Is there more of it? What are the signs? What can we do for them? Here to answer all our questions is psychologist Dr. Bodenstein-Kales. Tali, let's start with a definition of anxiety because it's hard to pin down.
We have certain types of anxieties. The most debilitating type of anxiety is what we know as generalized anxiety. And that's a situation where an individual, adult or a child, has fear of almost everything. So going out of the house to do something as mundane as going to school or going shopping or putting gas in the car can provoke intense fear. The fear, which translates into a manifestation of anxiety, which is psychological and behavioral, is very debilitating and can really imprison individuals who are afflicted by it. Then we have more specific types of anxieties. In children, it would be fear of sleeping alone at night in their own room because of the...
Many children have this.
Many children, indeed. And some of it is typical part of development, and for some, it's a very ongoing problem to the point where they will not have a sleepover with friends.
And want to sleep in their parents' bed.
And they do want to sleep in their parents' bed, or
Should
at least
parents
with
give
somebody.
into that?
Well, you know, it is complicated. It depends how debilitating the problem is. Some parents, and I'm not going to comment one way or the other because I think it's a real parental choice. Some parents love to be close to their children. Now, of course, it depends on the age as well. I don't think too many adolescents sleep with their parents, although there are situations where that is the case, and that becomes more problematic. But some parents are very much against sleeping with their children. But fear of sleeping alone in children is a real common but hard to break type of anxiety. But in any event, anxiety is a debilitating fear. And the fear, in most cases, is irrational because there are good worries and there are bad worries. And good worries is, going to the park alone in an unsafe environment. That would be considered a valid worry.
Reality oriented.
Exactly. And so anxiety, or the tendency to fear or to worry, in many cases is adaptive. But in many cases, it becomes irrational. It becomes a worry that is not justified.
Give us a couple of examples.
So if we're thinking about kids, for example, and sleeping alone in the room, they perceive that situation as being dangerous. So for example, they're starting to hear noises and they think that somebody is going to break in and harm the family. And so the cognition, the thought behind the fear.
So let's take that, because it's a very common one.
Yes.
What advice would you give about dealing with a child that is afraid to sleep alone?
So I work in my practice, and I do have a small practice in Toronto. I do see children with that type of anxiety. I see children with other types of worries as well. But this is a very common one that a lot of parents find quite worrisome because they fear that the kids will be teenagers or late into their teen years and still want to sleep with their parents, which most of the time doesn't happen. But the key is to do several things. Number one is to teach the kids the relationship between their thinking and their feelings. So I'm referring to a type of treatment called cognitive behavioral therapy, where really it's all about the thoughts that fuel the anxiety or the fears or the worries. So for example, the children are perceiving their bedroom at night as a place of danger.
So you would work with them on expressing
what I work with them on is, first of all, identifying the link between thinking and feeling. So it's the thought, the irrational thought, that fuels the feeling of being scared.
So you work on the thoughts.
So we work on the link between the thoughts and the feelings, and we work on hopefully trying to have the children realize that their thoughts are irrational. And so if they can challenge the negative thoughts, then they can reduce the feeling of anxiety.
You see a lot of kids. You work in the schools. Children come to you. Do you think there's more depression and anxiety with children than ever before, in your own personal experience?
Well, I think it's a more complex childhood era than it used to be. And in the sense that our kids are exposed to a lot more than when we were kids.
A lot more scary things, a lot more dangerous.
Yes, and I'm thinking of the internet and the access to
the internet has
things.
A lot to do with a lot of the recurrent thoughts of fear, anxiety. It triggers it, and we'll find out more about what the internet does, its influence on children's anxiety and depression, in just a minute. Dr. Bodenstein-Kales, I almost didn't pronounce it right, Bodenstein-Kales, but Tully.
Indeed.
You say that children's lives are more complicated today, and there are many more stimuli to trigger anxiety and depression.
So I think that part of the issue is that because of the internet, because of exposure to things that when we were children we were not exposed to, some kids are feeling less secure, and that can trigger anxiety as well.
But what about the internet? What about the internet does that?
So, I think
you said cyberbullying.
I think a good point is the cyberbullying. For example, when we were kids, yes, there was always bullying. Bullying has not been invented yesterday. Bullying is an ongoing thing. It's almost a human nature kind of phenomenon. But today, with cyberbullying, the impact of bullying is so far-reaching because of the access that kids have through social media, through Facebook, through how iChat, through all these means of communication. They can bully kids in such a way that the audience is so broad, and the hurtful impact of bullying just spreads like a plague. And recently there have been some suicides, particularly by teenagers, as a direct result of bullying. Because just imagine when you're a teenager in a vulnerable stage of development to begin with, when you see all these postings and rumors flying through and spreading among your peers, you feel pretty vulnerable, depressed, and anxious. And some kids, unfortunately, see no way out but to take their own lives. And of course, that's the minority, and thank God it's the minority of kids who choose to, not choose, but maybe find that this is their only coping mechanism. But bullying in and of itself is a major cause.
They're being called helicopter parents. There's a tendency to not allow children freedom to play on the street, to go on the subway, to go on buses, to arrange play dates. That term didn't exist, did it, before?
Right.
Play dates and everything after school is organized. Does that says implicitly, this is a dangerous world. You better watch it, because around the corner there could be this maniac ready to do it, God knows what with you. Would you say that's contributing?
Well, I think in some cases, for sure. In some cases, the parental tendency to worry and to be anxious is certainly transmitted to their offsprings, not just genetically, but also, because we do know there's a genetic predisposition to anxiety, to depression, but the message to watch out, to be hypervigilant, is sometimes transmitted by parents, not necessarily as a means to create anxiety, but the product is creating anxious kids. So it's almost like you have to have the combination of a genetic predisposition and the environment that says, watch out, this is really a dangerous world. And some parents are way overprotective and can inadvertently elicit
Did you allow
anxiety.
your kids to play on the street freely? Be honest.
So I have 3 boys. The oldest is 18, and then 16, and then almost a 10-year-old. You know, it is a different world than when I grew up. I grew up in Israel, in northern Israel. It wasn't so safe. I mean, we had terrorist infiltration from Lebanon. I grew up in a town called Nahariya, and we suffered a lot, but there was a lot of freedom in our childhood. You know, we didn't worry about child molesters or kidnapping or anything like that. And it was a much different childhood. I was more protective of my kids. For example, my kids didn't walk to school on their own, and the school was not that far away until they were older. You know, my soon-to-be 10-year-old, because he's petite, I still don't allow him to walk on his own. So I am protective, but I try not to convey the message that this is a very, an overly dangerous world, because I don't want to invoke that sense of hypervigilance and anxiety that may debilitate children.
You were an immigrant. You came as a child.
I did.
We're a nation of immigrants. There are children arriving daily that don't know English, that have to go to new schools and enter a different culture. Is this anxiety provoking? What happened to you when you came? How old were you?
So I came at the age of 13 from Israel with barely any English, really, really basic English, and came to a Hebrew day school. But it was a whole different culture. I had to learn not just the language to be able to communicate. I had to fit into the culture, and it was a culture shock, and it was anxiety provoking. I mean, it wasn't
easy.
That's
natural, but that's reality. It's normal to have anxiety over a situation like that.
Absolutely. So some anxieties are very natural. They're very common, and as I said before, they're very adaptive. The problem becomes whether anxiety and depression is debilitating. In other words, does it impair your daily living?
Okay,
and that's
let's get
question.
into that. Let's get into that after. What are the signs that we can look for that show a child is depressed or show that they're anxious, unreasonably anxious?
Right. So I get a lot of calls from concerned parents because, you know, as parents, we always want our kids to do the best that they can, to be the happiest that they can, and to be functioning well. And I think that as parents, we tend to worry about children, and so sometimes we worry unnecessarily, and sometimes we really have a reason to worry. And I think what I try to do is ask parents, does it impair, do the symptoms impair your child's functioning? So if we talk about depression, for example, depression in children doesn't necessarily look the same as it does in adulthood. For example, depression in children, in addition to sadness and gloominess, you see a lot of irritability and moodiness in young children who cannot necessarily articulate that they're feeling sad.
That's the problem
or
with children. They
depressed.
can't articulate.
Exactly. I mean, some kids are more articulate than others. And there's
But
no
take a
doubt.
6-year-old.
Exactly.
They're just
and
sad.
So parents have to be really aware of changes in their child's behavior. So one of the most common changes would be in sleep and appetite. Is the child sleeping more or less? Is he eating more or less? Are there changes in school performance? Is the child more lethargic? Is the child less eager to socialize? You know, and that's where the impairment of daily life really comes in. Because if suddenly the child is manifesting these changes, then the quality of life is not the same, and it's probably worthwhile to check it out. Now, I should say that depression in children is not as common as it is in the teenage years and in the adult years. It is because children, any way we cut it, children are more resilient. They're not
accepting.
And accepting. And part of the reason, I think, is because cognitively they are in a stage where it's all about me, and in a concrete stage of development. So they're not necessarily able to interpret the world in a more sophisticated way. When they become teenagers and they break out of the concrete stage of thinking, they can look at the world in a more sophisticated and negative way. So in some sense, children are really protected. Young children are protected by their innocence,
Which brings us back to anxiety, which is more prevalent than depression. Here's a common one. A child doesn't want to go to school. They're 7 years old. They don't want to go to school. They refuse. That
happens, and that's debilitating.
What
that's
would you do?
impairing.
What would you do about this?
Well, I think the first thing we have to figure out is what is happening at school. First question is there bullying going on? Because again, bullying, I find bullying as a very serious and impairing factor that is so insidious, that can do one of two things. They could harm the child internally in terms of self-esteem, depression, anxiety, or, as we've heard in the media over the years, children can act out and hurt others as a result of bullying. Most of the time, it's internally driven. So most of the time, it affects them in terms of their self-esteem and feelings of worth and that sort of thing. But not going to school, you've got to see externally what is going on. You've got to rule out bullying. You've got to rule out some kind of learning issues. Maybe school is just too hard. Maybe it's a child who cannot process all the information. Imagine going to work and having duties to complete and you feel totally overwhelmed. That is a big cause for school resistance for a lot of kids. And especially if they don't have the social incentives of school, they don't want to be there because it is just extremely difficult. So you've got to rule out the obvious: bullying, school difficulties, those kind of issues. If none of it appears to be the case, then we have to look internally. How is the child perceiving his or her environment? And that's where we delve into the cognitive behavioral strategies, where we try to look at the child's perceptions of their environment, because we all perceive our world from our own
Here's another
glasses.
common reaction to parents splitting up, separating.
Yes, which is more and more
You have to
common these
expect
days.
something, don't you? You have to expect some changes in mood and behavior.
Sure, there's
Isn't that natural?
There's no sugarcoating it.
There's
Divorce.
no way to avoid pain for
There
the kid.
there is damage. There's no way around it. Now, the more amicable the break is, obviously the better it is for the child. But even when it is amicable, it's fascinating because children have this wish for their parents to be together. I remember working with someone. She was less than 2 years old when her parents separated, so she didn't even remember the separation. I saw her when she was a teenager, and she still expressed a desire for her parents to be together, even though the father had moved on and had a second family. So, there's this inherent wish for parents to be together, and when parents split up, there is a cost.
So that's a good tip. What can parents do to mitigate the pain of the children? Be amicable. Don't have bitter, acrimonious fighting. Another one.
Well, I think the biggest one is be amicable and continue to have regular contact with the children for the parent who is moving out of the house. Hopefully, regular visits, regular contacts, regular activities with the children is beneficial. The children have to feel that the parents haven't abandoned them, because if they feel abandoned, depression and anxiety are very common reaction. Even after a split, there is a sense of loss. It's a grieving process for the parents as well as for the children.
Okay, there's lots to talk about. Will you come back?
Absolutely. Anytime you want to invite me.
It's a date. We'll be back next week. Remember to be a mensch.